Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Vaibhav Jyotsna Shrivastava and with me is Renuka, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Developed countries push $100 billion climate finance goal target deadline to 2023. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to attend 18th ASEAN-India Summit on 28th of this month virtually. China imposes local lockdowns to contain new surge in COVID-19 infections. Sudan's military declares a state of emergency as protests spread across Khartoum. New Delhi asserts India's strong commitment to regional cooperation under BIMSTEC. US government finalizes $50 million plan under the Quad Vaccine Partnership to expand COVID vaccine manufacturing in India. And at the T20 World Cup, Afghanistan set a mammoth target of 191 for Scotland. As India has created history by vaccinating 100 crore people against COVID-19, All India Radio salutes all the doctors, nurses, other frontline workers, and all those who got vaccinated and made this possible. Even though the country has achieved this feat, we caution our listeners that the battle against COVID is not yet over. We appeal to our listeners to get fully vaccinated at the earliest and also help others get vaccinated. During the festival season, please follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki doori for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now, the news in detail. A week ahead of the COP26 summit, the UK, which holds the presidency of the summit, unveiled a climate finance delivery plan to provide clarity on when and how developed countries will meet the $100 billion climate finance goal on Monday. The new outlook states that the goal will be met from 2023. This is 3 years later than what was committed to by the developed countries at the Paris summit in 2015. Developed countries committed to a goal of mobilizing jointly $100 billion a year by 2020 to address the needs of developing countries in the context of meaningful mitigation actions and transparency on implementation. The parties committed to continue delivering on this goal through 2025 at Paris conference. The Climate Finance Delivery Plan calls upon those developed countries who have not yet made a pledge should come forward with an ambitious climate finance commitment as soon as possible. It also calls for increasing finance for adaptation according to the Paris Agreement, which aims to achieve a balance between adaptation and mitigation. The plan also aims to develop a coherent strategy to collectively improve the effectiveness of private finance mobilization. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will attend the 18th ASEAN-India Summit at the invitation of the Sultan of Brunei. The 18th ASEAN-India Summit will review the status of ASEAN-India strategic partnership and take stock of the progress made in key areas including COVID-19 and health, trade and commerce, connectivity and education and culture. ASEAN is central to India's Act East policy and its wider vision of the Indo-Pacific. The year 2022 will mark 30 years of ASEAN-India relations. The Prime Minister will also attend the 16th East Asia Summit to be held on the 27th of October virtually. The East Asia Summit is the premier leaders-led forum in the Indo-Pacific. As founding member of the East Asia Summit, India is committed to strengthening the East Asia Summit and making it more effective for dealing with contemporary challenges. Spokesperson of Myanmar's ruling military government, Mr. Zaw Min Thun, said on Monday that Myanmar was undecided whether to attend the upcoming ASEAN Summit. The ASEAN Summit is to be held between the 26th and the 28th of October. We have a report.
At an emergency meeting last week in Brunei, foreign ministers of the regional bloc agreed that the current leader of the junta, General Min Aung Hlaing, will not be invited for the upcoming meet. Brunei that a non-political representative from Myanmar will be invited to an upcoming ASEAN Leader Summit later this month. According to reports, Myanmar military spokesperson Zhao Min Tun told local media on Monday that the exclusion broke ASEAN principles. Meanwhile, the military government of Myanmar started to release more than 5,600 people arrested during the anti-government protests in the country after the February 1st military takeover. ASEAN, along with key regional and global powers, have called for Myanmar's full and urgent implementation of the 5-point consensus. The 5-point consensus calls for an immediate cessation of violence, constructive and inclusive dialogue, and the facilitation of humanitarian assistance, among other matters. Abhishek Mukhopadhyay for World News, AIR.
India's Foreign Secretary, Mr. Harshvardhan Shringla, asserted India's strong commitment to regional cooperation under the BIMSTEC framework and making the organization stronger and result-oriented. Addressing an international symposium on Monday, Mr. Shringla said, "Neighborhood First and Act East are the cornerstones of India's foreign policy." Mr. Shringla said at the last summit in 2018 in Kathmandu, the Prime Minister of India had announced several initiatives to strengthen BIMSTEC cooperation. Underlining the importance of connectivity, the Foreign Secretary said BIMSTEC is unarguably a crucial link in connecting South and Southeast Asia.
As noted by BIMSTEC leaders, robust connectivity is an essential prerequisite for economic integration of the region with smooth cross-border movement of goods and people. The BIMSTEC Master Plan for Transport Connectivity, finalized under India's chairmanship of the expert group last year, envisages a seamless multimodal transport system across the region with efficient transit facilities to enhance the mobility of goods and people. This will stimulate intra-regional trade and investment. It identifies 264 projects requiring an investment of $126 billion over a 10-year horizon from 2018 to 2028. Projects worth $55.2 billion are already at different stages of implementation.
Mr. Shringla also added that the BIMSTEC Center for Weather and Climate, being hosted in India, is fully functional with state-of-the-art facilities to provide early disaster warnings. India will organize a Tri-Services Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief HADR exercise towards the end of this year in the backdrop of the pandemic. China has imposed lockdowns and other restrictions to deal with recent outbreaks of COVID-19. The latest set of restrictions comes as China prepares for the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. According to reports, northern China has been the epicenter of the latest outbreak, accounting for the majority of cases. Officials issued a stay-at-home order for some 35,000 people in the Asian county of Inner Mongolia.
Meanwhile, the U.S. government finalized a financing arrangement with the Biological E Limited, formalizing $50 million to expand the company's capacity to produce COVID-19 vaccines. In a statement, the U.S. Embassy in India said that the continued partnership will help bolster near-term COVID-19 response efforts and will also benefit long-term global health in India and throughout the Indo-Pacific region. The development underscores the significance of the agreement under the Quad Vaccine Partnership. A new land border has been passed by China, outlining how it patrols its land border with 14 other countries. The land borders law will come into effect on the 1st of January. The move comes at a time when many of the countries bordering China face the brunt of its belligerent stance as regards both its land and maritime borders. According to media reports, the text of the law pronounces that China's People's Liberation Army, PLA, will be allowed to counter any invasion, encroachment, infiltration or provocation that occurs on any of the country's borders. The details have caused a lot of consternation among the nations bordering China. According to analysts, the development must be seen in the context of Beijing's attempts to display its assertiveness at a time when it is embroiled in border conflicts with its neighboring, including India, Nepal, Japan, Mongolia and Taiwan, to name a few. In the South China Sea, China has maritime boundary issues with most of the ASEAN nations. India has on several occasions highlighted China's aggression at the borders. Earlier this month, spokesperson of India's External Affairs Ministry, Mr. Arindam Bagchi, said that the current situation along the line of actual control, LAC, in the western sector of the India-China border areas was caused by the unilateral attempts of Chinese side to alter the status quo in violation of the bilateral agreements. Last week, India also strongly rejected China's objection to a recent visit to Arunachal Pradesh by Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu. New Delhi has asserted that the state is an integral and an inalienable part of India. Elsewhere, China has put up fences and wires at Nepal's territory in Humla district. A report by a study panel formed by the Nepalese Ministry of Home Affairs made several recommendations identifying the problems along the Nepal-China border in Humla from border pillar numbers 4 to 13. The report also notes that since the 1963 boundary protocol, the territory belongs to Nepal. The panel report also said that the Chinese side has also been obstructing Nepali citizens from grazing their cattle in the areas concerned.
Sudan's military has dissolved civilian rule, arrested political leaders and declared a state of emergency. General Abdel Fattah Burhan, who had been heading a joint council with civilian leaders, blamed political infighting. According to reports, protesters have taken to the streets of the capital, Khartoum, and there were reports of gunfire. The Information Ministry said that armed forces fired live rounds at Sudanese people who took to the streets of Khartoum to protest against Monday's apparent coup. Military and civilian leaders have been at odds since longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir was overthrown 2 years ago and a transitional government set up. The country, which is in an economic crisis, confronts a worsening situation as military takeover puts it at risk. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok is among those reported to have been put under house arrest, along with members of his cabinet and other civilian leaders. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on tackling terrorism, a priority for global communities. In conversation are Anil Kumar Trigunayat, former ambassador, and Simran Sodhi, a journalist.
Today we are discussing the vital topic of how tackling terrorism is today a priority for the global community. We have seen how different world capitals, different cities in the world have become victims of terrorism, and today tackling this menace takes top priority. Ambassador Trigunayat, when you see the terrorist activities happening around the world, especially when we talk today in the backdrop of what we see happening in Afghanistan, how much do you think the world needs to focus on tackling this menace?
Well, thank you, Simranji. In fact, the terrorism is the biggest problem today, apart from the climate change. And I think that the problem here has been that the world was not on the same page. And that is the reason, and due to certain policies of several countries, that we have also seen that the radicalization, extreme terrorism, and a very large number of groups and syndicates of terrorists and extremist groups emerging across the world. We have seen this happening all along. India knows about it because India has suffered from it for more than 4 decades. And if you remember that the world really got to recognize the gravity of Indian situation after 9/11. Until then, they used to consider it some kind of a political issue. They were not giving due credence. But once it happened in the Western world, in the US, then everybody sat up and started doing it. And thereafter, also the policy frameworks that happened by the US also compounded the problems even more. And we have seen what happened, that in the wake of 9/11, the US went and intervened in Afghanistan to eliminate Al-Qaeda, basically. And in the process today, we have seen that Taliban was an extremist group for them. But 20 years later, we have seen the cycle completed. Now, that has emboldened many of the extremist and terrorist groups. But on the face of it, the world has been talking about that we should fight terrorism. Everybody is scared about the terrorism emanating from Afghanistan and Pakistan. And that has been a major challenge. But in my view today, everybody is sensitized thoroughly. But they are still struggling exactly how to do it. The problem is that even in the face of it, most of the countries are taking a rather a realpolitik kind of a view. And although we know that in the United Nations Security Council, there has been resolutions 2396, and that one resolution that India, with regard to Afghanistan, started very clearly articulates the Taliban or whichever the rulers are there will not allow Afghan territory to be used against any country. But today it is also a matter of fact that Al-Qaeda is present there in 15 provinces. We are also definitive about the groups supported by Pakistan, whether it is ISKP or whether it is Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed or many other groups like the Daesh and others, which are present there. And there is not really a great effort exactly how to control them. I mean, you can go and use drone exercises here and there, but you have not been able to decimate them. The fact remains that there are certain states like Pakistan that unfortunately use terrorism as an instrument of their foreign policy.
Master Trugnath, as you pointed out the role of Pakistan, and this is something that we've discussed. India has raised this at various global forums, including the UN, and other global community also have recognized that Pakistan is playing this role of sponsoring terrorism in other nations. But as you pointed out, we also find that most world community, most of the world countries have an ongoing diplomatic engagement with Pakistan. So the question then arises is, how do you deal with a situation like this and with a neighbor like Pakistan? Because unfortunately for India, the geography is going to stay the same. Pakistan is always going to be our neighbor. And how do you then deal with a state that is hell-bent on sponsoring terrorism across its border, which uses terrorism, as you said, as a matter of state policy? So how do you look at it with India going ahead, dealing with a very belligerent Pakistan and dealing with this now evolving situation in Afghanistan, which is a very worrisome situation?
Yes, you are absolutely right. I mean, situation is worrisome for one reason. Another reason is that we are also looking at vulnerability of Taliban itself, because Taliban is not a monolith. So even if they tell you that they will not allow their territory to be used for terrorism by any group from their country, you can hardly believe it, because they do it themselves. I mean, we are seeing that there are bomb blasts and killings of their own people nearly on a daily basis in that place. On the other hand, we see Pakistan, which has the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, which are really the parental organization. It is the ISI which has created Haqqani group and controls it. Now, if those are the groups that are very much part of it, and besides, largest number of terrorist groups are hosted, and the designated terrorists are hosted by the Pakistan government. So now the world knows about it, and they also share intelligence about it. They, in my view, are able to tell Pakistan, and many of the countries have tried to stop assistance or made it, predicated it on Pakistan doing something worthwhile, credible action against this. And that is the reason, you know, that FATF discussions are going on. Pakistan for the last 1.5 to 2 years has been remained on the grey list and is threatened to go on the blacklist. If that happens, then it will have no recourse to any foreign funding or no money. So terror financing is established because Pakistan has remained on that list. Now that is one. Second thing, as far as India is concerned, it has to fight its own battles. You know, we have changed tracks now. We are trying to take care of these terrorist groups across the line of control. I mean, that is something India has done by advancing its approach, action-oriented rather than reaction-oriented. So that is something. Thirdly, you'll have to be very careful about, because it's, as I said, it's a global syndicate. So therefore, one has to be very careful that what impact does it have. Now, the victory of Taliban in many of the countries, including in India, has been hailed as the victory of Islam or these kind of things, you know, which has nothing to do with Islam at all. But at the same time, for these kind of people who are radicalized or who are on the verge of being radicalized, for them, it is a very big deal. And so de-radicalization ab initio from within the country also has to continue. And then, of course, one has to continue on this diplomatic route. This week, we are going to talk to Americans. We have just had discussions with the British. We had the discussions with the Russians and even with the Chinese. And, of course, Pakistan always says that it is a victim of terrorism. Of course, it will become a victim of terrorism because it's a Bhasmasur syndrome. If you create something, it's going to burn you to ashes. So that is something I feel that we have to continue to do on multiple fronts. Firstly, protect yourself and stop radicalization within the country to the extent possible. And also keep continuing sharing intelligence, talking to people, holding the world accountable. Because India is listened to today in the world. And it is the major voice against terrorism at the international forum.
Dr. Trubna, as we see that India and the US will hold talks this week, the question arises, what is it that India should expect or that India should look forward to getting as far as the India-US cooperation, especially on counter-terrorism is concerned? We have seen that Pakistan and Afghanistan are two countries where the US enjoys a certain amount of leverage. They can use their leverage there in a fashion which can benefit the world, which can decrease the spread of terrorism from Pakistan especially. So going forward, as India and the United States engages this week, what should our expectations be from the United States specifically to counter terrorism?
You see, US has been saying the right things to us, right? And since, as you can see, it will be 19th or 20th meeting of the group, there have been ongoing progress. The progress is that we have two things in this, and this is not only in this working group, but there are, of course, the ministers meet, the Prime Minister and President Biden have met, all the military and intelligence officers, they all meet. We have agency-to-agency exchanges. So I think at every point of the time, the thing is that the world has to call out Pakistan and its leadership. Because Pakistan today is a democratic state in name. It is still controlled and governed by ISI and the army in that place. So it is important that the Americans who hold a very big control, of course, today China is their biggest benefactor, but the Americans and Chinese also talk on this issue. And Chinese are worried about terrorism. Even though as far as India is concerned, they don't care. But they themselves are worried about this. That's why they have cut a separate deal with the Taliban. So I think that we'll have to continue to talk to all the major powers and try and get them on this. As far as US is concerned, US and India broadly on the same page. And all these discussions happen within the Global Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. And I believe that the two sides will be discussing exactly how the UN Security Council resolution which India chairing passed during that period in Afghanistan will be implemented, how Pakistan will have to be told to, stay the course, and that the Americans can really enforce it to a great extent because the Pakistanis are looking to the US also for some kind of freebies in return for. But as you know, that the Americans and Pakistanis are talking of using Pakistan bases against fighting Al-Qaeda and all that. Hopefully that will work out because, see, the Americans have clearly said that they do not feel that they can be fooled for too long by the Pakistanis. But, you must also not forget that over time, Pakistan is one country which has been able to encash its nuisance value, strategic nuisance value with all the major actors, whether it is the Gulf countries, whether it is the Russians, whether it is Americans, whether it is the Chinese. So everybody, they have been able to do that, play it up. So that has to be exposed. And I think that the Americans do understand now. So we need to pursue with them, and so that there is an unmistakable message that goes to the terrorists and the unmistakable message that goes to the Pakistani government and its benefactors.
And we will continue our discussions as we follow the developments of the US-India talks this week, and also how the situation changes in Afghanistan rapidly and how the global community continues to tackle the menace of terrorism. With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
India's Chief of Army Staff General Manoj Naravane and Bangladesh's Chief of Naval Staff Admiral M. Shaheen Iqbal exchanged views on strengthening bilateral defense cooperation. Admiral M. Shaheen Iqbal is presently on a 7-day official visit to India, wherein he will meet various high-ranking Indian officials. The Defence Ministry has said that during these bilateral interactions, issues relating to joint cooperative efforts would be discussed. These include coordinated patrol along international maritime boundary line, bilateral exercise Bongo Sagar, conduct of naval training and reciprocal visits of delegations.
The UN World Food Programme, WFP, has warned that millions of Afghans will face starvation this winter unless urgent action is taken. WFP said that more than half the population, about 22.8 million people, face acute food insecurity, while 3.2 million children under 5 could suffer acute malnutrition. Executive Director of the WFP, Mr. David Beasley, said that Afghanistan is now among the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Minister of State for External Affairs V. Muralidharan will be leading the Indian delegation to the 2-day-long 6th ministerial consultations of Abu Dhabi Dialogue to be held in Dubai from Tuesday. Abu Dhabi Dialogue is a regional, voluntary and non-binding consultative process between Asian countries of labour origin and destination, which serves as a platform to facilitate regional cooperation on contractual labour mobility, sharing of best experiences and learning from one another's experience. During the visit, the minister will have bilateral meetings with other ministers. He will also visit Dubai Expo 2020.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has congratulated Uzbekistan President Shavkat Mirziyoyev on his victory in the election. In a tweet, Mr. Modi expressed confidence that India-Uzbekistan strategic partnership will continue to strengthen in the second term of President Mirziyoyev. The Prime Minister conveyed his best wishes to Mr. Mirziyoyev and the friendly people of Uzbekistan. In cricket, Afghanistan thrashed Scotland by 130 runs in their debut match of the T20 World Cup at Sharjah Cricket Stadium on Monday night. Opting to bat first after winning the toss, Afghanistan posted a score of 190 runs for 4 wickets with the help of Najibullah Zadran's 59 and Rahmanullah Gurbaz's 46 runs.
And now a report from the business world.
Amongst global markets, Asian markets ended mixed today, so Japan's Nikkei 225 index fell 0.7%. Singapore's Straits Times index shed 0.1%, but China's Shanghai Composite Index climbed 0.8%, and South Korea's Kospi Index ended 0.5%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index ended marginally higher. In Europe, London's FTSE 100 had risen 0.5%, and Germany's DAX had gained 0.3%, but France's CAC 40 had shed 0.1% in intraday trade. Global crude oil prices extended gains today to hit multi-year highs, lifted by tight global supply and strengthening fuel demand in the United States and beyond as economies recover from pandemic-induced slumps. So, Brent crude futures rose 64 cents to trade at $86.17 a barrel. Earlier in the day, the contract touched $86.43 a barrel, the highest price since October 2018. U.S. crude futures climbed 75 cents to $84.51 a barrel. They hit their highest since October 2014 at $84.76 a barrel earlier in the day. Back home, gold rose 182 rupees to 47,023 rupees to 46,306 rupees per 10 grams at the Delhi's bullion market. This is Lalema Aneja Dang for World News, All India Radio.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Guardian says China to vaccinate children as young as 3. The Global and Mail reports developed countries to miss goal of $100 billion climate aid pledge to poor nations. Financial Times reports Turkey's lira sinks after Erdogan threatens to expel Western diplomats. Wall Street Journal says Amnesty International exits Hong Kong, citing national security law. Sputnik News writes Microsoft notifies over 600 companies that were targeted in 23,000 cyber intrusion attempts. Union Minister Shri Anurag Singh Thakur met CEO of FIFA Yuri Georgiev in New Delhi. During the meet, they discussed how football could be encouraged at the grassroots levels and expanded with more tournaments and events. Mr. Thakur said that there is a growing interest in sports in India.
And now a quick look at the headlines once again. Developed countries push $100 billion climate finance goal target deadline to 2023. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to attend the 18th ASEAN-India Summit on 28th of this month virtually. China imposes local lockdowns to contain new surge in COVID-19 infections. Sudan's military declares a state of emergency as protests spread across Khartoum. New Delhi asserts India's strong commitment to regional cooperation under BIMSTEC. U.S. government finalizes $50 million plan under the Quad Vaccine Partnership to expand COVID vaccine manufacturing in India. And at the T20 World Cup, Afghanistan off to a flyer as they beat Scotland by 130 runs. India is celebrating the 152nd birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from South Africa.
Vaishnav Jan do tene kahiye je peed parai jane re par के उपकार करे तो ये पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान
With that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.